Hello and welcome back to Gospel Music Theory. I'm Ryan Thompson and we'll be finishing Lashun Pace's, the first section of Lashun Pace's There's a Leak in This Old Building. Let's get right into it. Oh, by the way, if you hear a loud clicking noise like that, it's because of this. This is a dry erase marker. I don't know whose it is, but I want one. Now let's get into it. We're starting in measure 7 of the first part. The first chord of measure 7 is the subdominant. This chord is an F7 sharp 5, start with A in the bass. Now, the dominant of the subdominant being an F, in this context, since the F is on top and the tritone's in the bass with an F at the bottom, with an A at the bottom, it really, you don't really hear the F so much as you hear A. A is the tonality that shifts here, and it's basically serving the function of a median chord. The next chord you have here is a D7 flat 5 sharp 9 over A flat. Now, any dominant 7 chord where you have no natural 5 and no natural 9 is considered an altered chord, meaning you altered them. You altered the 5 or the 9. Now, this chord in particular is prickly and difficult to classify, but I will. D is the dominant of G. G is the dominant of C. C is the dominant of F. So this is actually the dominant of the dominant of the dominant of the no, I'm joking. It's the dominant of the dominant of the dominant. Or in this case, it's the dominant of the supertonic. But if it were the dominant of the supertonic, it would have D, F sharp, A, and C. But it doesn't have an A. It has an A flat. And what does that mean in particular about that kind of dominant chord, that kind of altered chord, altered dominant? That altered dominant is unique because it's not just one chord. It can potentially be 4 different chords because this chord has 2 tritones, the D and the A flat, as well as the G flat and the C. So this could be a D7 chord, as it is here, or it can be an A flat 7 chord, or an E flat 7, or even a B flat 7, because those 2 tritones give it 2 possibilities per tritone. Now, moving on, since that is not what this is. Now, it's not just the dominant 7 of the supertonic. It's also a tritone substitution because D is the root of the chord, but it's also a tritone. You can't have a tritone as the basis of a chord. You can't have it as the root and still have it function in traditional theory. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't make sense anyway. The actual tritone of the D7 is the other one, the G flat and the C, or F sharp and C. So, the next chord, relatively straightforward, is the G7 flat 5 sharp 9. Same altered chord, but it's easier since you don't have to go all the way to the D. You go to the G. G is the dominant of the dominant. C being the dominant of F, G the dominant of C. This one in particular isn't a tritone substitution because you have G in the bass, and you also excuse me. The tritone substitution doesn't really apply here because the dominant of the dominant is so common and so functional here. But what do I mean by that? You have the dominant of the dominant, but you also have a tritone substitution directly before that. And before that, you have a chord serving as a chord. At this point, you're not going to hear a tritone substitution. You're not. You're not going to be able to detect it. This is where the auditory tradition of the oral tradition takes over in traditional theory. There are certain things that you hear when you play that don't really mesh well with written theory. While technically you could say that this is a tritone substitution, in practice and in the voicing that we have here, it's not considered a tritone substitution, even though it is technically, even though it could be technically. Moving on, this little thing here. This will take some explanation. This is an F sharp or G flat, whatever you want to call it. I'll call it F sharp for now. F sharp, major 9, flat 5. Now, let me sit down. There are 3 things with this chord that you have to look out for, or notice, that you should notice. One is that F sharp isn't in the key of F. There's no sharps in the key of F. And there's no G flat in the key of F either. So what is G flat or F sharp in relation to F? Well, it's a half step above it, right? Right. In gospel music, there's something called chromatic upper neighbor tone movement, or substitution, as you may call it. What it refers to is when you take whatever the parent chord is and you play whatever the quality of chord above it, 1/2 step, you modulate, essentially. Not really a modulation, but you play the chord that's 1/2 step above it in the same quality. Now, you use that chord as a passing chord to go back to the parent chord. Now, playing them one after the other, parent chord, chromatic upper neighbor, parent chord, you can do that, but a lot of times people omit the parent chord initially and just use the chromatic upper neighbor chord as a passing chord. In this case, that's what's been done. Now, there's one other thing. With chromatic upper neighbor tone movement, it has to be the same kind of chord. If you have an F7, the next one has to be an F sharp 7 or G flat 7, whatever you call it. This is where another thing in gospel music changes the quality of the chord, which is, quite fittingly, chord quality alteration. Chord quality alteration is where you take one note of a chord and change it to any other note, any adjacent note. Now, it cannot be the root. You cannot change the root. That's the only rule with this. You can't change the root, and you can only move one note. That's the only one that can be moved. You can move 3, 5, 7, but not the one, not the root. No. What's done here is the next chord is actually an F chord, F-A-C with the F on top. But remember, this is a 16-bar gospel blues. So in a blues, all the chords are dominant chords. So instead of what you have written is an F, but what you really have in practice or in function is an F7. So the chromatic upper neighbor of F7 will be F sharp 7 or G flat 7 if you're in the key of F and you're sticking with the key signature of flats. Now, if you move the 7th up a half step, you have an F7, F sharp 7, but you raise the 7th scale degree. So it's no longer an F sharp 7. It no longer contains the flat 7. You have an F sharp major 7. Now, 9s and flat 5s, as you altered chords, are added for color, not for function. Just as how you have the D7 flat 5 sharp 9, or the G7 flat 5 sharp 9, or the F sharp 5. When looking at function, you take away the alterations. That way it's easier to understand. Now, if you take away the alterations and look at the function, take away the chord quality alterations, as well as the ornamental alterations, you have F sharp 7. F sharp 7. You have F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E natural. Now, the A sharp is an enharmonic note with B flat, of course, you know that. But remember, in a dominant 7th chord, you have a tritone. Tritones can be substituted. So you have A sharp or B flat and E natural. If you flip that tritone around, you have E and A sharp, or E and B flat. For the other tritone, the other chord that goes along with the F sharp 7 with the tritone substitution would be C. We C7. So you have, this is actually the dominant 7, but it's also a tritone substitution of the dominant 7, and it also has an chord quality alteration. Now the next part is the F for F7. Just like the first part for the first 3 measures. Then this chord, you have the F7, just like in the first part. This is measure 4 of the first part if you go back to the beginning. Now, looking in the bass, you have a glissando, meaning a chromatic move or scalar move, depending on how you play it. In this case, it's going to be chromatic from A, which is the target, to C, and then moving down by half step to the target. This is the B over the B chord, yes, which is the subdominant. This is a common thing to lead to here, leading to the A. Next, you have the F sharp 7, the F7 sharp 5, F7 sharp 5 over A, just like in the first part. Same thing, dominant of the subdominant, serving the function of the mediant. Next, you have a plain old D7. D7, remember, is the dominant of the supertonic. This isn't a tritone substitution like the other one. This is the actual D7. Not flat 5, sharp 9, but the actual one. Now remember, these functions are what you're looking at. You have 3, the mediant and submediant. If you go mediant, submediant, the next one is supposed to be the supertonic. But that is not the symbol for supertonic, not even a little bit. Well, a little bit. It has the 2, but you know what I mean. Again, you have the chromatic upper neighbor tone movement. The 2, or well, I'll just call it the 2. The 2 in the key of F is G. A flat is a half step up from G, so sharp 2. But in a minor key, you would have, but this is a diminished chord, so it's borrowing a chord from a minor key. You have chord quality alteration as well, meaning that it's not a diminished chord in the key of A flat, borrowed from there. it's fully diminished because the seventh has moved down a half step. Now, you may be saying, wait, I thought that secondary dominants were borrowed chords. Well, that is true. You are correct in that. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Borrowing chords in this context is not saying that it has to fit specifically to the key you're borrowing it from. It's borrowing chords that serve a function. Now, this is the 2 chord. You can replace this with any other 2 chord that applies to a key in F. Now, remember, this is a specific passing chord. This is a chromatic upper neighbor tone. So it is by its definition a passing chord. Of what? It has to go down to the G. So the G is the supertonic of F. So the supertonic and its chromatic upper neighbor tone serve the same function, regardless of the chord quality, and regardless of whatever alterations you make to it. Next, you have the C altered, dominant 7 altered. It's rather straightforward. Then you have the chord you had before, F sharp, major 9, flat 5. Same notation as before. Tritone substitution with chord quality alteration. You don't have to put alt on an alt chord. It's already in the chord nomenclature up above. You usually only write alt on the Roman numeral analysis if it's a chord quality alteration. You don't need to put alt on the dominant 7 of any other chord unless it's a chord quality alteration. And from there you have the F. It's an F. This is what's called a walk up. Now, walking up means you're moving from one note and moving upward, walking up to your target. Here you have a walk down. Here you have a walk up. It refers to the general direction, even though you had a glissando going up to it. These are the notes that are actually given values. So these are what are counted in determining the direction of the walk. This is a walk up, and this is the C altered, 16th bar, so it's going to repeat. This is played 6 times because I got lazy and I started to run out of whiteboard, so I just put 6 times there. Play that 6 times. There's a 7. By the way, all altered chords are some type of 7. Now, all that's a lot of information. But you may be wondering, okay, what's that sound like with the other part? Well, I'm going to show you. I'll give you one last look at it. Subdominant, dominant of the subdominant, function of 3, dominant of the supertonic, tritone substitution, dominant of the dominant, dominant 7, tritone substitution with chord quality alteration, and repeating the first part, then again, dominant 7 of the subdominant, and you have the subdominant itself, walk down, dominant of the subdominant, serving the function of 3, dominant of the supertonic, serving the function of submediant. You have the sharp supertonic diminished instead of half diminished. There's a chord quality alteration and chromatic upper neighbor tone movement. You have the dominant 7. This is an altered chord. And you have the dominant with a tritonal substitution, the chord quality alteration. Then tonic, then walk up to the dominant, which is just C altered in this case, then repeating. Now, if you were following the first part, I'm going to play all the parts that I've given thus far, and I will show you what it sounds like. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like or subscribe for more, and I will see you later. Bye.